March 15th, 1945. The hills above Remagen trembled under the weight of distant thunder, not from the sky, but from tanks. A cold drizzle soaked the forest floor, mixing with mud and diesel as a convoy of weary German grenadiers dug into the ridge. Some hadn't slept in 48 hours. Others hadn't spoken in 10. The trees stood like broken teeth, blackened, splintered, still bleeding sap from last week's shelling. Inside a camouflaged command, half-track, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Wehner gripped the field radio, breath shallow, lips pressed into a thin line. Repeat, retreat, immediate withdrawal across the line. Confirm. The voice crackled through static. It was Oberst Reimann, desperate, angry, terrified. Wehner didn't answer. He looked at his map again, then at the 5 remaining tanks under his command. 3 Panzer IVs. 2 were running hot. 1 had a cracked gun breech. His sergeant, a stocky Bavarian with a soot-smeared face, leaned in. "Sir, what do we do?" Wehner didn't blink. "We hold." The sergeant stared. "They've built a bridge, sir, across the Rhine." Wehner finally spoke, low, sharp, almost to himself. "Then we make them regret it." He turned the radio dial until the voice vanished into static. Behind him, the forest creaked. Far away, over the treetops, came a sound like iron breathing. American convoys, moving faster than anyone believed possible. But Wehner didn't believe in retreat. Not now. Not when the enemy was so close. Not when everything he'd fought for, everything he'd lost, demanded a final stand. He took 1 step out into the rain, boots sinking into the German soil. He didn't know that just 20 miles behind him, over 40,000 American troops were already crossing that miracle bridge. And the battle was no longer his to win. He hadn't seen the pipeline, the rail convoys, the ice-packed Coca-Cola crates dropped by parachute to American frontline medics. He thought they were still fighting a war. He didn't know. America had already built the peace, while Germany bled in the past. The world that shaped Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Wehner was cracked stone, soot, and a father's photograph in a broken frame. He was born in Dresden, son of a school teacher and a veteran from the Great War. His childhood was filled with rules, medals, and the memory of hunger. He wore his father's Iron Cross, in secret at age 9. By 18, he was in uniform. By 24, he commanded what was left of a regiment. Now, in March 1945, the world around him was collapsing. But he didn't see it that way. He still believed in the comeback. 2 weeks earlier, he had halted 3 American tanks using a single PaK-40 and a bluff. For that, High Command had given him a promotion, a new pistol, and a pat on the back that stank of desperation. The 11th Panzer Grenadier Regiment had once been 2,000 men strong, full of veterans from Kursk and Sicily. Now they were 500, scraping frost off rusted MG-42s, eating soup made from horse bones and powdered starch. But morale held because of officers like Wehner. He made them believe they still had a chance, because he believed it too. Every night, his adjutant read from the official communiques. The Führer has moved a new panzer division west. The Americans are overstretched. The secret weapons are nearly ready. Wehner stared at his maps, not like paper, but like prophecy. He believed the terrain was on his side. The American armor would have to cross through valleys, where trees could be felled to create choke points. His engineers had planted mines, strung piano wire across roads, hidden anti-tank guns under hay bales. They had little fuel, but enough for a strike. They had no reinforcements, but the enemy didn't know that. They had no air support, but the fog was thick. That, too, was a weapon. He trusted his men, and they trusted him. Corporal Metz, who had lost his brother at Bastogne, swore he'd follow Wehner to Berlin. Sergeant Baer, with a limp from Monte Cassino, called him the last real officer in this army. They all saw the same thing in him, that stubborn fire. But Wehner wasn't a fanatic. He wasn't like the SS units, still quoting Hitler as if their veins ran on ideology. He simply believed that this was the final bend in the war. That, like Frederick the Great or Napoleon at Arcola, history would grant one last stroke of brilliance to the side that dared. He wasn't ready to accept that the Americans didn't need brilliance. They had something else. He just hadn't seen it yet. Not the numbers, not the system, not the way a free society had built a war machine that could afford mistakes, because it could simply outbuild them. He looked east and saw desperation. He looked west and still thought they could win. But the sky was already humming with something different. And soon he would hear it. It started with the sky. A low, unnatural growl, like metal being dragged across stone, rolled over the treetops before anyone saw them. Then came the streaks. Not just one or two, dozens. American fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts, screamed overhead in tight formation, their underbellies glinting between breaks in the fog. They weren't attacking yet, just flying, fast, low, confident. Wehner stepped out from his trench and looked up. His breath caught. It wasn't the aircraft that shook him. It was the pattern. They weren't scouting. They weren't harassing. They were guiding something bigger. A runner came crashing through the brush. Private Kessler, red-faced, panting, soaked with sweat. They're coming through the forest road, sir. Trucks, big ones. We saw at least 20. Wehner frowned. Where's their armor? Don't know, sir. Just supply trucks. But they're fast. That didn't make sense. No American supply units moved ahead of armor. That was doctrine. Wehner had studied it, drilled his men around it. He grabbed his binoculars and climbed a muddy overlook near the ridge. That's when he saw it, a thick column of dust winding through the woods, bending like a living thing. Trucks, half-tracks, jeeps, not crawling, but charging, as if the entire U.S. Army had been unleashed. In the distance, plumes of black smoke curled from demolished farmhouses. Not random, sequential, like they were clearing a corridor. Still, Wehner clung to his belief. They've outrun their supply lines, he told Sergeant Bear. They're reckless. If we hit the middle of the column, we split them. But Bear said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where that dust cloud was growing thicker. And then something else arrived. A hum, deeper than the rest, like a factory had been dropped into the forest. Wayner watched as the trees shook. Then he saw it. 4 bulldozers, side by side, clearing a path straight through the ridge. Behind them, flatbed trucks carrying bridge sections. His mind reeled. They were building roads while moving. No army moves like this, he whispered. He meant it as criticism, but it came out like awe. The map lied. Everything Wayner had planned, the choke points, the ambush zones, the mined crossroads, all of it collapsed in a matter of hours. He had positioned his Panzer IVs to control the valley's only road, but the Americans didn't take the road. They made new ones. Within a single night, his lookouts spotted fresh gravel laid over farmland, bypassing his traps entirely. Bulldozers cleared ancient stone fences like they were paper. Trees, once thick enough to stop trucks, were chain-cut and shoved aside by tracked cranes. At dawn, the fog lifted, and that's when the tanks came. Shermans, dozens, not from the west where he expected, but from the north. Wayner's jaw clenched. The valley was supposed to be impassable. His maps said so. The winter rains had turned it into a swamp 3 weeks earlier. But now there was a floating bridge across the marsh, temporary pontoons slotted together, leading straight to his flank. He grabbed the field radio and barked for artillery. Nothing. He tried again. Silence. The comm lines were gone, either jammed or cut. He didn't know which. Then came the roar. American half-tracks burst through the tree line on both flanks, infantry leaping out like clockwork. They moved fast, but not frantic, like they had rehearsed this 100 times. His men returned fire. Grenades arced. 2 Shermans caught fire. But for every tank they stalled, 2 more rolled in. A squad from his right flank broke, then the left. He tried to rally them, but his voice was drowned out by machine gun fire and the grind of treads on wet stone. By mid-morning, his defensive line had folded into retreat. Still, he held. He dragged a field woman into a farmhouse doorway and fired until the barrel smoked. He lobbed phosphorus grenades into advancing squads, watching them scatter, until the wind turned and the smoke blew back in his face. His eyes burned, his hands bled, but he didn't stop. Around noon, they captured a lone American soldier, a wiry, mud-covered private with 3 days of stubble and a bullet graze on his helmet. Wayner interrogated him through a medic. "Where are your tanks coming from?" he demanded. The American smiled through cracked lips. "Red ball," he rasped. Wayner blinked. "What's that? A code?" The prisoner chuckled once. "No, sir. It's a highway." Wayner stared, but the medic was already backing away, eyes wide. Highway? What highway? He didn't understand. Not yet. That night the shelling slowed. Only the distant thump of American mortars broke the silence. Vayner crouched in the corner of a half-burnt farmhouse, wrapping gauze around his wrist. The windows were shattered, the roof torn open by a near miss. Outside, the moonlight cast silver shadows across a muddy orchard, where 3 of his tanks now lay silent, their barrels aimed at nothing. His radio operator, Otto, returned from a scavenging run. His face was pale. "I found something," he whispered, holding up a leather map case. U.S. Army Standard issue. Vayner flipped it open. Inside, detailed maps, marked lines, engineering schematics, all in English. But the symbols were universal. Arrows pointed to black dots. Black dots connected by dashed lines. One of them ran directly under the ridge they were defending. "What is this?" Vayner muttered. Otto hesitated. "I think it's fuel." "Fuel?" "Pipelines. Buried." Vayner's eyes scanned the legend. Powell system, petroleum, oil, and lubricants. Each line ran west to east, parallel to the front, under roads, rivers, and now, beneath their boots. He dropped the map as if it burned. "They've been fueling their army, under the ground." He stepped outside. The orchard was silent. And suddenly, he heard it. A faint hiss, carried on the wind, low, mechanical, alive. His boots sank into the wet earth as he walked. He knelt, pressed his hand to the soil. Warm. Not from the sun, not from artillery, from something else. Otto joined him, trembling. "They're not bringing fuel. They're delivering it from Normandy." It didn't compute. It couldn't. From the beaches of France, across hundreds of miles of war-torn Europe, the Americans had built a hidden artery, feeding trucks, tanks, bombers, everything. Vayner stood there, frozen. His entire doctrine, the idea that you could cut supply lines, isolate units, starve an enemy into retreat, it meant nothing now, because this enemy didn't run on roads. It didn't stop to refuel. It was refueling as it advanced. He looked down the valley, and for the first time, it felt like the war wasn't about soldiers anymore. It was about systems. At dawn, the mist returned, thick and cold, curling between the trees like breath from a sleeping giant. Vayner walked the perimeter with numb steps. His boots squelched through mud stained by oil, blood, and something stranger, shattered glass. American glass. Near a collapsed wall, his medic had laid out supplies scavenged from a wrecked jeep. Bandages, rations, and a crate. Vayner stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Was ist das?" The medic looked up, hesitant. "From the jeep, sir." They dropped it with parachutes, marked for frontline medics. The crate was wooden, clean, branded with something absurd. Coca-Cola. Vayner knelt, slowly. The label was unmistakable. Red and white, curved letters. The icon of America. He opened it. Inside, bottles. Still cold. Some intact. One cracked, fizzing faintly. The air smelled sweet. Suddenly, a groan came from the corner. The wounded American tanker they had captured the night before, young, barely 20, lay against the wall, wrapped in the blankets, half conscious. He stirred, smiled weakly. "You try it yet?" he rasped. Vayner stared. The boy nodded towards the crate. "Cold drop. Came in this morning." Vayner couldn't speak. The enemy was drinking soda. During a firefight. The young American coughed, then grinned. "They drop ice sometimes, too, if the winds are right." Otto whispered behind him. "Ice?" Vayner didn't answer. He picked up a bottle. His hands, still shaking from the night before, gripped it like it was a weapon. This was more than a drink. It was a message. While German soldiers were burning fence posts for heat, while medics cut uniforms into bandages, the Americans were parachuting refreshment to the front line. Not essentials. Comfort. He looked around at his men, mud-slicked, gaunt, eyes sunken with exhaustion. Then back at the boy. "How often?" he asked. The American blinked. "Every day, sir, give or take. Depends on the flight path. Every day." As if war was scheduled. As if someone, somewhere, had planned joy into the machinery of destruction. Vayner stood up, bottle in hand. He didn't drink it. He just held it there, staring into the glass. As the sun broke through the trees and lit the label like a lantern, and in that moment, something shifted. He was no longer just facing men. He was facing a country that could airdrop happiness. The trenches near the southern ridge were quiet now, not from victory, but from exhaustion. Vayner walked slowly between the muddy walls, past shivering conscripts and glassy-eyed veterans. Their rifles leaned like tired shoulders. Their hands trembled, not from fear, but from cold and disbelief. He had requested reinforcements, not because he expected them, but because he needed to ask. What arrived instead was one man, Oberst Konrad Weigel, a name Vayner recognized from North Africa, a decorated field officer, now gaunt, hollow-eyed, his medals caked with dried mud. He moved like someone who had walked too far, carrying too much regret. They sat together in a shallow dugout lined with canvas and frost. Neither spoke at first. Then Weigel reached into his coat, not for a weapon, not for a map, for photographs. He handed them to Vayner, slowly, like they might shatter, black and white, blurry in some corners, but unmistakable. Aerial shots, rows and rows of vehicles, tanks, trucks, cranes, all lined up like toys across an endless American field. Taken near Reims. 2 weeks ago, Weigel said. These aren't frontline assets. These are reserves. Vayner counted, rows stretching into the distance. Hundreds. Then more photos. Massive steel structures, temporary airfields, bridges with rail tracks welded directly to them. And something else. Warehouses labeled Ford, General Motors, Hershey, factories, not in Ohio, but in France. They don't fight like we do, Weigel said. His voice was quiet, even, defeated. We plan offensives. They build ecosystems. Vayner looked up. How long have we known? Weigel laughed bitterly. We knew in 43, but we told ourselves it was luck. Then in 44, we said it was timing. Now, I think it's us who are out of time. He paused. We didn't lose this war in the Ardennes, Lieutenant. We lost it the day they landed, and kept landing. Vayner clenched the edge of the photo. We still have fight. Weigel nodded. Yes, but for what? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a page, torn from a journal. Handwritten, in German. I wrote this in Africa, he said. Before El Alamein. He passed it to Vayner. We can't match their tanks, so we'll hit their fuel. If we cut the fuel, we stop the war. Weiner's hands tightened. He remembered the warmth in the ground, the crate of soda, the calm, steady roar of machines that never slept. He looked back at the trench. His men were watching, still believing, still waiting for him to lead. But he could feel it now. Not fear, not rage. The thing that came before surrender, truth. They moved in the dark, but not blindly. American engineers worked like ants across the valley floor, headlights dimmed, hands calloused, voices low. The rhythm was industrial. Weld, hammer, bolt, advance. Vayner watched them from a hillside just before dawn. Wrapped in a cloak that still smelled of cordite, he lay on wet grass beside Otto and 3 scouts. No one spoke. Below them, a bridge was rising. Not in weeks, not in days, in hours. A Bailey bridge, all metal lattice and precision joints, clicked into place like it had been built in someone's garage. The support trucks arrived before the welders were even finished. By the time the sun crested the far ridge, it was done. A full, armored column rolled across it, calm, steady, without a pause. Otto cursed under his breath. That's the 3rd bridge they've built this week. No, Vayner murmured. That's just the 3rd we've seen. They shifted position, crawling deeper into the brush. Later that day they heard it. Engines, not tanks. Trucks, hundreds of them, painted olive drab, headlights covered, bumper, each marked with a red circle on the windshield. The Red Ball Express. They came in waves, hauling fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, radios, even mail. One stopped near the edge of the woods. A black American driver jumped out, checked his tires, then pulled out a harmonica and started playing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't rushing. He was delivering war like it was milk. Vayner stared through the branches, stunned. These weren't elite units. They were support, yet they moved with more power, more rhythm, more certainty than any armored division he'd seen. Back at camp, his mechanic, an older corporal named Henke, spoke quietly. They all will drive the same model, he said. Same tires, same parts. If one breaks down, they just swap it. He kicked a rusted axle lying in the mud. We have 15 types of trucks, and none of the right pieces. Vayner sat down hard on an ammo crate, staring at the earth. So this was how they fought. Not with genius, not with flair, but with sameness, with scale, with speed. He had thought the Americans were slow, soft, naive, but they were moving like a factory, forward, constant, unbreakable. And suddenly, it made sense, the roads they carved, the bridges they built, the soda. It wasn't luxury. It was design. a machine of machines. It was the magazine that did it. Weiner found it wedged under the dashboard of a wrecked American Jeep, damp, half-burned, but still legible. Stars and Stripes, March 10th edition. He flipped past the cartoons, the casualty reports, until a headline caught his eye. From Detroit to the front, how America builds a tank an hour. He read it once, then again, not one a week, not one a day, one per hour. The article explained it plainly, in a tone that almost sounded bored. Detroit produced the chassis. Cleveland sent the engines. Pittsburgh rolled out steel. Final assembly in New Jersey. Then by ship, by train, by truck, all the way to the battlefield. Weiner stared at the page like it was witchcraft. It wasn't the speed that stunned him. It was the system. Each factory built a part. No one waited for orders. They simply moved. Like blood through arteries. He looked around at his own field workshop. A tangle of smoking cables, torn transmissions, mismatched bolts, and two mechanics trying to weld a captured Sherman part into a Panzer chassis. Germany built beautiful machines. But machines don't matter when you can't fix them. Later that evening, as the firelight flickered inside their makeshift bunker, Weiner spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular. They don't build to preserve, he said. Why? They build to replace. Otto looked up. Sir? He held up the magazine. They don't care if it breaks. It's cheaper to send another. It's not a war to them. It's a production schedule. And that was the difference. Germany fought for perfection. America fought for multiples. Germany sent elite divisions. America sent battalions of interchangeable courage, backed by blueprints and conveyor belts. He remembered an old SS officer scoffing. They're just amateurs. No pride in craft. But that was the fatal error. Because while the Reich protected its few wonders like relics, the Americans printed war like newspapers, modular, replaceable, unemotional, and because of that, unstoppable. Weiner stared at the crate of Coca-Cola in the corner. It wasn't luxury. It was a byproduct of a system so vast it could airdrop comfort without slowing down the killing. He closed the magazine and whispered, "They don't just outnumber us. They outthink us." The truth didn't come as an explosion. It came as a tally. Weiner sat alone beneath the broken beam of a collapsed stable. The wind hissed through the rafters. Snow began to fall. Slow, wet, indifferent. He opened the American Logistics Report. It had been taken off a dead lieutenant near the river. Standard issue. Nothing secret, because, apparently, the truth didn't need hiding. He scanned the numbers. 96,000 aircraft built, 600,000 trucks, 23,000 tanks, 2 million gallons of fuel consumed every day. Every single day. He exhaled. A shallow, tired breath that tasted like rust. 2 million gallons. Germany couldn't have produced that much in a month. He turned the page. During the Rhine crossing, 400 tons of ammunition were delivered per hour. Per hour. He read it again, then did the math. While his men were rationing 5 shells per gun, The Americans were burying steel into the soil by the minute. It wasn't just overwhelming. It was absurd. No doctrine, no morale, no elite battalion could compete with this. It was like trying to stop the tide with a bayonet. He remembered what Oberst Weigel had said. "We lost the war before the first shot. We just didn't know it." Now he knew. Every bridge they destroyed, rebuilt overnight. Every convoy they ambushed, replaced by 3 more. Every retreat they ordered, blocked by a new American road. His final counterattack, once so bold on paper, now felt like a child's drawing, thrown into a furnace. His field reports told the same story. Units evaporating under pressure they couldn't even see. Not tanks, not guns, just movement. Relentless, rhythmic, like something deeper than war itself. He flipped to the final page. A quote was circled in red ink, a colonel's assessment from Patton's Third Army. "We burned 2 million gallons to trap 1 division. Worth every drop." Wayner blinked. They had sacrificed an ocean of fuel to kill him, and still had oceans more. He looked at his boots, caked in German mud, at the ice forming on his sleeves, at the crates of captured ammunition stacked beside corpses they hadn't yet buried. Everything he knew, strategy, honor, even bravery, felt brittle now. Because this war wasn't won by courage. It was won by capacity. He pressed his head to the stable wall, closed his eyes, and for the first time since Warsaw, he stopped imagining a future. 23 years later, Karl-Heinz Wiener stood beneath a glass display case in Kansas. He wore no uniform now, just a gray wool coat and a name tag that read Karl. His hair had turned white. His voice, rarely used, came slow and soft. The museum was small, tucked beside a veterans' hall on the edge of town. Inside, it smelled of old wood, floor polish, and American memory. Children ran past mannequins dressed in olive drab. Tourists pointed at a Sherman turret mounted to the wall. But Wayner stood still. His eyes were fixed on a crate, wooden, preserved, labeled in faded stencil. Coca-Cola Bottling Co. Frontline Supply, Drop, March 1945. There it was, just like the one from that ruined farmhouse, except this one was unopened. The bottles inside still sealed, still clear, still perfect. He raised a trembling hand and touched the glass. Beside him, a volunteer noticed. "You served?" she asked. Wayner nodded. Opposite side. She smiled gently. "Glad we all made it through." He didn't smile back. He was remembering. The sound of Red Ball engines humming through mist. The warmth of buried pipelines. The taste he never took from that bottle in the snow. The feeling of being outbuilt. He whispered something. Not to her, to the crate. They brought soda to a battlefield. She looked at him, puzzled. He continued, voice low, with something between bitterness and awe. "We drove tanks, like horses, stopping for hay, counting every drop." He stepped back, looked around at the display. Radios, rations, typewriters, all mass-produced, all still alive. "I thought I was fighting soldiers," he said. "But I was fighting a country that thought like a factory." The volunteer said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. Weiner turned to leave. He paused at the doorway. Outside, American flags rustled in the wind. A boy laughed in the distance, and a soda machine buzzed quietly by the exit, humming like a soft memory. He dropped a coin in. The bottle clinked down. He didn't drink it. He just held it, like he did all those years ago, and understood.